Alright, what's up guys? Welcome back to another Path of Exile 2 video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the developer comments on Warrior class, Titan, as well as their opinions on armor. They don't go into too many specific details, but we'll go ahead and take a look at this, and I'll just add my commentary because it's been the subject of some controversy lately, or just very strong opinions. First off, if you don't mind hitting that subscribe button, really appreciate it. Helps me out. And with that out of the way, we'll go ahead and jump into this.
So, speaking of unhappy, we're going to get into state of melee slash maces is the next portion of the questions here. So, let's talk about warrior and maces. What are your guys' feelings currently on the state of maces? How do you want mace skills in particular to function in Path of Exile 2? Obviously, they're very long cast times. Movement of mobs can be very quick. You can get stunned, interrupted. On the tree as well, there's many nodes that literally reduce like attack speed in order to gain other things. So more or less, Warrior's in a position where a lot of the people feel like it's clunky, too slow for the current in-gameplay loop. Or Warrior feels like maybe the first class designed when the vision of PoE2 was fairly slow. So what is your guys' response as to the state of mace skills, and where would you like to take it?
Well, a first question I would have for you is, do you think it's a problem during campaign or only in endgame?
I would say it is more specifically a problem in an exponential ramping as you continue the game until you hit a point where there's pinnacle bosses, and then you can kind of one-shot pinnacle bosses with some of the setups currently. So there's a mid portion of the middle to later in-game in which if...
Yeah, and that's kind of just like a strange thing with the class is that it goes very slow through the campaign, at least in my experience. Not unbearably slow. I personally enjoyed the campaign as the class, and then kept thinking that as I unlocked certain skills further down the tree that maybe it would pick up a little bit, but that was not the case. The game definitely kind of pigeonholes you into really just like Stampede. I think is the most viable skill because you are moving, even though it's clunky. I've thought about trying knockback in it, but I just haven't, and I don't really want to sacrifice damage. I think the skill should inherently knock back. Like, if you're stampeding and then you bounce into, like, a little spider, it, like, ricochets you backwards, and it just kind of kills some of the class fantasy there.
It feels like a problem, specifically because you have things like volatiles that actually track you, and if you stay in position, you're heavily punished. So it seems counterintuitive to the design of some of the mobs.
I do think that there is a problem in game here. I'm not exactly sure what we need to do about it yet, though. I'm glad to hear you say that it's an in-game issue and not a campaign issue, because I have to say that my experience playing Warrior through campaign is actually that it's fine. But I did hear a bunch of people talking about that as if that was not fine, and I think that it is. Like, I think, or at least I can't reproduce the issue during campaign if that's the case. So really, it is more of an in-game issue, and I don't know that I've got a solution for you right now. But yeah, like it's. We do need to, like, once again, it's one of those more subtle things that we need to look into, and I suspect that the big balance patch will be looking at that a lot more. There is something about
It kind of worries me that they say they don't really have a good solution. Like, I could probably give you multiple solutions just off the top of my head. Either make cast speed or skill speed, attack speed, something affect the channeling time on some of the abilities like Supercharged Slam, make it affect Stampede more, add knockback to Stampede, look at some of the other abilities, and I think they just need to like buff the damage all around. I don't like that your regular attack is like significantly higher DPS single target when I'm fighting like a boss or like a pinnacle boss or a rare mob. I want to be using my like supercharged abilities, not just like auto attacking them to achieve the highest single target DPS. I think maybe since they sort of increased the damage again on Supercharged Slam, the total DPS of that might be a little bit higher if I do a full, like, I don't even know the full channeling time now because they increased it, but like I'm assuming it's 5 plus 6 seconds maybe. If I do a 5 or 6 second supercharged slam, I think it will maybe out DPS my normal attack, but not by a lot, and then you have to basically sacrifice standing perfectly still for that entire duration in order to achieve that. Like if you have to cancel it prior to the full charged up version, you're probably losing DPS.
The warrior that doesn't scale in the same way that some of the other classes do, I believe. But that we sort of need to understand what the other classes end up looking like as well a little bit to understand that as well. Yeah, I don't know if you've got any more different opinions about that.
Well, I mean, the attack speed is a big part of it, right? You obviously have that is a multiplicative axis that every other cast speed or attack speed is a multiplicative axis every other, or I guess comet trigger speed that every other class is getting, and the warrior has a deficiency in that. And even if you were to get it, yes, obviously there's the fixed attack times which don't scale. It's probably a combination of those are too punishing, or there's too much of them, and there's not enough attack speed available.
Yeah, I think that fixed attack time is a terrible mechanic. They definitely need to look at reducing those or allowing those to be reduced by like attack speed or skill speed, something. The only problem is that there's not like we only have access to one faster attack support gem, so we would only be able to use that on like one ability. So even that would not really, I think, fully help alleviate things. And then like on the passive tree, some of the better damage nodes for maces give you minus attack speed. So why they do that, like, and not to any of the other weapon types is kind of confusing. I did see one commentator somewhere, I forget where, saying that really what they should kind of look at is I think it's the Devastator from Lost Ark. And Lost Ark, even though it's like kind of pay to win, it was a very fun game from like a class design standpoint and just like ability standpoint. But that class and some of the other classes get like a hyper armor or a super armor effect during certain abilities. If they were to add something like that to Titan, I still think they should reduce the times a little bit on the abilities. But something like that, like if you got like an earthen armor, just so it'd be kind of like thematic. But like let's say when you start charging up your abilities, like you gain an earthen shield or an earthen armor that increases your stun resistance and reduces incoming damage by whatever percent, that makes sense. Something like that. I think that would be cool, and it would also help kind of solve the problem, and not like just buff melee across the board, because I don't think that all of the other melee classes need to like partake in just like a flat damage reduction, like in PoE1 with Fortify. I think adding in just like a Fortify would not really solve the problem, because every other like evasion energy shield character that's melee would also be able to
It'll be somewhere in
that.
that region for sure where we have to make some adjustments, and it probably won't even be that drastic to get it to feel right. And of course, like, it is easy to compare it to, especially, I know you said more like late mid to mid end game thing, but like when you look at the like top end, it's very easy to compare it to the absolute insanity that is like, Pillar of the Cage God with Hoa and all of that, which is just ridiculous right now. It's very easy to compare it to that and be like, well, Warrior will never be viable. But there are also a lot of quite good end game warriors that are certainly being played, and I don't want to certainly make it seem like it's completely useless. And I mean people using maces, not just people who are doing it for the ascendancies.
Karn's a notable example. He's like level 99 in SSF, but he's having to use the Herald of Ice tech, which is very highly speculative to be nerfed, right, in order to make it feel good. So while I would agree there's people that are doing it, I would also argue there are people that are doing it as a masochist in order to be like, I'm a warrior guy and I'm going to do it regardless.
There are also others, maybe not.
That's a good point. That's basically me, literally me, just playing warrior like to try and prove a point at this point, and see like how bad it actually is that everyone's telling me.
That advanced and not that far up in terms of her level, but yeah, sure, understood. Like, it's certainly on the weaker end at the end game, like, without question. That being said, I don't think it would take too much to get it there, but yeah, again, it's part of this massive balance recalibration we didn't need to do now that we've seen the state of everything.
Right.
Warrior or mace skills are certainly on the ones where you're going to do a lot more bringing up than you're going to do bringing down. Aside from things like the Hammer of the Gods, just in one shot with bleed, and then the boss is dead, and you don't do anything. Right? You get those anomalies out there where it's like, yeah, they're going to die in one shot no matter what. Things like that aren't going to be buffed necessarily, but
fair enough.
There is more to buff in the mace spectrum than there is in most of the other things, I'd say, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So that answers the offensive spectrum for the warrior. Now let's talk about the defensive. And one of the things in the reveal video was armor, for instance, is getting fixed or buffed, I should say, and we'll talk about that in a moment.
I wouldn't. One of the reasons we didn't dwell on that too much is because I wouldn't want people to think that that's more of a change than it is. Like, we are doing a bit of a buff to armor, but it's not like the hugest deal. And
so I've already watched this, and this take on armor is very interesting. Everyone kind of, besides myself, like, I don't think armor is necessarily the problem. I think it's more your life totals, and I think it's also just because it's being compared to Energy Shield, and Energy Shield is like definitely way overtuned. And basically it was kind of refreshing to hear the game devs like basically share that same opinion. So I kind of think like I could guess the direction they're gonna go to like change this.
I think there is more we have to do. Like, there's more complicated stuff we have to do with armor, I think, to make it more interesting. But there's a lot of arguments about this. One, because it is like, yeah, I'll just say that there's a lot of arguments about like how exactly this should be addressed. One concern that we have, which is probably totally out of left field as far as what the players would say, is that we don't think that there's enough of a difference between the big hit and the small hit. There's a number.
See, that's what I was talking about. So everyone, at least in my comments lately that have been debating this with me, they say that the big hits are so bad that it's completely overwhelming your armor, and I haven't experienced that as a like level 90 Titan with around 17k armor with scavenged plating on, full stacks, and then a glancing blows shield max block. So I take 50% damage 75% of the time. So 75% of the time, it like doubles the effectiveness of my armor. But even then, like 25% of the time, it's not helping me. And I've not been really hit by anything for a big chunk of my health outside of like chaos damage or like elemental damage buffed mobs. So I just, in my experience, it's not the physical damage that is the problem compared to my characters
in
like
the formula
armor
that is different in PoE 1 than it is in PoE 2. That results in the armor being the difference between a small hit and a big hit in PoE 2 and PoE 1. It matters more in PoE 1, but in addition to that,
so just to reiterate what he said, that, and this is another thing I think a lot of people may have got wrong, because we've just, as players, some players, I think one specifically, I forget who, tried to reverse engineer the armor formula, assuming it's the same as PoE 1, and then took that and ran with it and said armor is twice as bad as PoE 1, when here we have the devs telling us, no, there's actually a completely different step in the formula that makes the big hits not matter as much as in PoE 1. So, this is from the dev's mouth.
So we actually think that PoE 2 might be wrong in this regard, and we need to change it. But in addition to that, there's also a thing that's happened where, like, white monsters can...
So yeah, I mean, if they were to change that and actually make armor worse, that would be a serious problem.
Hit harder in PoE 1 and PoE 2 than they did in PoE 1, and that means that the thing that armor is supposed to, like, because like part of the intention with armor is it's like, okay, like when you're talking about like big boss hits, like it has less of an effect than what it would have off like a bunch of small hits, but sometimes the small hits from a white mob are not even that different from what a boss hits you with. And so this is actually meaning that the sort of the idea of armor being based on the damage hit is kind of got like a few issues that we have to deal with. So I don't know if you've got any more thoughts on this particular topic, but it is like something that we have to sort of worry about a little bit.
Yeah.
See, that's very strange to me, and just comparing it to all the comments I've seen from players that the boss hits are so massive compared to like the trash mobs that I just don't know because I've not done like the pinnacle bosses yet, and armor's completely useless versus them. But here you have the game devs telling you that the difference between some of the white mob hits and a boss hit is not really that different. So it's just very interesting to hear kind of like the other side um, of this story straight from the devs' mouths versus like what I've been reading in YouTube video comments.
It's again one of these things I do need. I mean, I hate coming in here so unequipped, but again, it's just the timing with the holiday and all
Yeah.
that, with all these things where it's like have to look into, have to look into, have to look
Yeah.
into. But that is the nature of it. I mean, most of, especially once there's an actual released product, it's like a good, 50% of our time goes into having to investigate and look into live operations problems like this.
So we are buffing a little bit of armor a little bit in this patch for like to because there
Yeah.
are some issues there. But honestly, the full solution for armor is going to have to be more complicated, and we're going to have to sort of work out some stuff around it. It's there's definitely something that I think there was another thing as well is that like the other defenses tend to have like extra mechanics that are easier to access than what armor has. Which is another sort of side thing, which is like not entirely obvious when you're designing it initially. So it might be that there's more like supplementary things that the armor, like strength characters,
It looks like we still don't have the full like the patch notes yet. I was just
actually
checking
need
that.
to have around defense, and so like stuff like that can kind of matter a lot. So
Like wind dancers universally just better at than scavenge plating as an example if those are meant to be paired. One is just like you have it, and the other is I have to armor break, and then on bosses it's much harder to sustain. So we've made changes there, of course. We did buff
mechanics that are easier to access than what armor has. Which is another sort of side thing, which is like not entirely obvious when you're designing
I
it
just wanted
initially.
to hear that again.
So it might be that there's more like supplementary things that the armor, like strength characters, effectively need to have around defense, and so like stuff like that can kind of matter a lot. So
like wind dancers universally just better at than scavenge plating as an example if those are meant to be paired. One is just like you have it, and the other is I have to armor break, and then on bosses it's much harder to sustain. So
Yeah, that's one issue that I have with scavenged plating. Early on in the game, I felt like it was completely useless because you get access to it very very early on, um, but you don't necessarily have access to actually even really break armor on that many mobs to get like a full 10 stacks and maintain it. And I think only like I can only do it on my character now because I've invested a few points, um, like five or 7 points into being able to have 100% armor break just from the passive tree. So that's really the only reason I'm able to really even utilize it on maps. But again, like I said, on bosses, it's almost like useless. Like I can maybe get a 5% increase versus bosses unless they have a bunch of ads. Whereas in maps, I can sustain like a plus 50% armor, more armor. So it would be nice if it also worked versus bosses, especially since like usually, generally speaking, at least in the past PoE1, bosses hit much harder than white mobs. After listening to this interview, I'm not really even sure.
we've
Basically,
made changes there,
like
of
the
course.
assumptions,
We did
the assumptions that everyone has made so far seem to be possibly like inaccurate or false.
buff the armor. I'd say it's in the it's obviously hard because of the big hit, small hit, but it's probably in the like 15% more effective kind of region. Our changes in 011. And then yeah, a lot of it is also like okay, if you consider that evasion also applies to damage mitigation from Invoker. You got a lot of things going on with acrobatics, which turns evasion into arguably. I mean, sure, it penalizes your evasion, but like it then kind of gives you almost as much PDR against certain hits as a lot of armor, and then you have a lot of very very strong defensive, with Grim Feast and Energy Shield, and so like it's not only armor is weak, it's also that evasion and energy shield have some extreme strongs that are going on.
And that's kind of what I've been saying too, is that it's not necessarily that armor is quote unquote bad. It's that the other two are either overtuned or they have other mechanics interacting with them that make them quote unquote stronger than armor. And if they add some stuff in, like I think there's a unique chest piece that's it's just kind of like garbage in my opinion. I don't think I could build around it because it has 100 base armor after they buff it in this patch, but it makes your armor apply to elemental damage from hits, something like that. I mean, on the tree there is like your armor applies to fire damage at 25% effectiveness. But it's still like a pretty big point investment, and then that again, it's only fire damage.
So
Not
would-
to say, oh, these are all going to be nerfed. I'm just saying there's some there's some meeting in the middle that we need to do for sure.
So they give you a feeling from, like, I played Warrior 90 first. That was the first thing I did, and I would enjoy Warrior as an archetype the most. Would you say it's a fair statement to say the Warrior and mace skills and, sort of that side of the tree in particular is in a state where it has the worst of all of them? So it has the worst of the defenses and armor, it has the worst effective HP in terms of life, and it has basically the worst offensive capabilities as well. So you could see why I'm feedbacking so hard in relation to this archetype.
Man, that's a brutal savaging, but I suppose I can't necessarily disagree with any of those with any of those assessments.
Fair enough. We can move on to the next topic then, unless you have
yeah.
other statements on it.
Oh, what do they have?
You have shields.
Yeah. You are right that it effectively falls in that way. Yeah. Let's just sure.
Yep.
Okay. So moving forward here, we have charm. So I saw that there was some.
Okay, so that's the full segment on this interview for like Titans and armor. And I think they kind of hit it, like nailed it on the head there at the end that it definitely is in a bad spot in general compared to the other classes currently out at the moment. And I think part of it too is that we're kind of thinking of classes tied to the weapons, like thematically. I'm sure you could probably make like a Titan and use, quarterstaffs, for example, and make a strong Titan. But then, would you have been just better off making it as a monk with a quarterstaff? So a lot of it, I think, is we're tying like these thematic weapons to the class, and that also influences our opinions on the strength of the class. So possibly when more weapons come out, that and we have other options, other access to skills, because it kind of seems like possibly what they intend or what they would like us to do is, if you're using the dual specialization tree, maybe you have an axe in one slot with a dual specialization and then a mace set up for dual specialization, or possibly like a sword and axe setup, and then maybe like the interaction that you can come up with between those different ability sets, like that may possibly lead us to make stronger characters. It'll be interesting to see how those interactions are able to play out and like the different skills. Like if we're assuming there's like massive cooldown abilities for the other weapon types, like would you Hammer of the Gods weapon swap and then like use the equivalent of the axe version, sort of like high cooldown ultimate abilities and just like blow up the boss instantly, or have one set up for more like crowd control and then switch to another one for like single target, something like that. So I think that'll be interesting to see as more things come out. Like we're still missing skill gems, we're still missing support gems, we're missing classes. They're going to be releasing more and more unique items, doing more balance passes. I think a lot of people get lost in the fact that this is truly an early access. This is not like PoE 2 League 1, and the game is like supposed to be in a fully balanced state. So that to me, I think like people are getting just upset that, for me specifically, that I am playing an armor and life character because it's like inferior to evasion energy shield, even if it's like working for me. Like just because PoE players are so you know, dead set on like min maxing, and I'm the same way. Like if it was a PoE 1 league and it was this much weaker, I would probably have re-rolled a character a long time ago. Um, but this is not a league; it's early access. Things can be buffed and nerfed at any time. So if you've ever played like World of Warcraft or a game like that where you see a lot of like buffs and nerfs that affect you over time, you kind of just got to go with the flow, pick the class that you enjoy playing, and then like you see where you know the chips are gonna lie, and then whether the buffs hurt you or help you. If you're just constantly re-rolling to try and play the current meta build, to me that's not fun. And with having not like all day every day to put into a game, maybe if I did, maybe if I had all day every day to play, I would play a meta build, but I don't. So I like if I were to try and constantly re-roll to play the newest thing, the newest meta build, probably by the time I even got to the point where I could take advantage of it, it would already have been nerfed. So I'm just gonna keep trucking on my Titan for the time being, until I get to the point where I think maybe I want to try a different class. But kind of what my intention is, especially too since we don't know when they're gonna do like economy resets, like league resets. I may as well just play like my Titan until they do an economy slash league reset, and then see what new content's coming out and reevaluate, and then decide like what do I want to explore like in this newest like reset for the early access. So those are my thoughts, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Again, hit that subscribe button if you enjoy the content, and remember to give them the D.